Welcome to another episode of the Being Human and Doing Psychotherapy podcast, where I try to tackle what is that human part that every psychotherapist brings into their practice, and what is psychotherapeutic in all of us, and how we can use that for our benefits. And today I'm joined by someone who is very special to me. I would say a kindred spirit. And that's Robyn Posin. And I don't think I want to introduce her in any other way, because I'm sure that her story will reveal itself through this conversation. And I just really want to welcome you and to thank you for the support you have given me through the over the ocean, so in a long distance support.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm so glad.
So I normally start this podcast by asking the question of what are some words that you would describe yourself with, and what are some aspects of you that you bring forth by identifying with those words?
I think the most important thing is that I'm authentic and real, and on the far side of a long struggle to heal myself. And so a lot of the work that I did to heal myself from a really challenging childhood has informed what I do with people, and I think I can't remember the other part of this question, but I think that I use story as a way to heal. And I think the most important thing I do is be there to affirm wherever anybody is, that everything in our culture tells us we should be someplace else. And you can't be any place until you're where you are to start with. And so when I work, I try, and also in all my relations, I try to bring an openness, a willingness to be curious rather than judgmental, so that we can look at everything and embrace even the things we hated about our life. It needs to be embraced in order for it to grow healthiness inside of us. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Actually, what stayed with me is that all the things we hated about ourselves, or and then embracing them, and in a way, what I'm curious about is how do we meet ourselves where we are, even in the hatred, even when we hate that parts, and embracing ourselves that, okay, this is where I am at the moment, I am hating this, and yet I can embrace that about myself.
That's the thing. You have to embrace the hating at the same time. And for me, a lot of times when I'm doing or have done that at the same time, except Anne Lamott, who's a really wonderful writer. You know her work?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so she says sometimes sitting alone in her living room, she could be arrested for unlawful assembly because she's having conversations with so many parts of herself. So for me, when there's the wounded self and the part that hates the things that are in the wounded self, then I come in as sort of the moderator to get the dialogue going, so that I can help the hating part apologize to the hurt part for bringing that hate in, but that it's okay that she has to feel it and go through it. But I try. It's really important to then have this overarching self that supports both of these pieces
polarities,
of it. Yes, absolutely.
And I'm curious, as I'm still maybe at the stage where the observing self is outsourced to a therapist, or to someone who holds me.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, when was that transition to from someone holding you to you holding those pieces of you happen, and maybe how did that happen for you?
I'm thinking. I think it it really happened with the creative arts therapist that I worked with. And I think how it started was and I think that's how it starts for the people I work with, is they have a Robyn in their head. And I had her in my head, so that when things got dicey, I already knew what she would say if she was there. So I would bring her Carolyn's voice in. And then over time, what happens is you actually merge with that voice. But the thing is that for most of us who have the hater or the judger and, the critic,
or the hatchet lady,
having a commentary, we didn't really get to incorporate a loving and compassionate mom voice for ourselves. So you borrow the therapist, and then in a magical way over time, you're sort of over self, and you're good I will use my language, you're good mommy self, and the good mommy of your therapist totally merge, and there's no separation.
I am noticing that slow transition happening,
and
it is wonderful.
Good, yeah. But it's because those of us who have such severe inner critics really did not have compassionate and open and honoring parenting that could allow us to be how we were, that we could be told that this wasn't okay, but that we weren't judged and condemned or beaten or criticized. So the work is creating that inner sanctum for yourself.
And I guess I would like for the people who would listen to this to maybe paint a little bit more of but I would say her story now.
Okay.
So that people maybe know a bit more about your journey, because I know, obviously, because I read the book and I was passionately interested, but I would maybe just start from the title of the book, which is "Go Only as Fast as Your Slowest Part Feels Safe to Go."
Yes, I'm just getting something so I don't cling. Okay, I'm back.
So for me, already the title slowed me down. Already the title brought healing. And I guess I'm wondering, where did the transition happen for you? And I have some information, but maybe we can say a bit more to people who don't know your story.
So start from where the transition or from the story? I'm not sure which would be better.
I would say start from the story. Yeah.
Okay, the story is that I was birthed by a woman who really should not have had kids. She didn't have room to address the needs. When I was born, after the birth, she weighed 97 pounds and I weighed 9.
Oh, wow.
Which gives you a sense. And then the next piece of history is that she tried to breastfeed, and according to the story that I was told, I fed so voraciously, I created abscesses in her breasts. This is not something that really happens, but that's what she believed. And right there, you have my history, that from the beginning, she had no room for me. And so I learned, this goes back to the title, so I learned early on that I either had to do it myself or do without. The other story from my childhood is I have visual and sensory memories of being in my crib and being cold and wet. And if I cried, the person who came was my mother always had long, well-manicured fingernails, would poke and jerk me around. But if I could tolerate staying with the cold and the wet, ultimately, for reasons that I have no idea about, she would turn up and then she would change my diaper. And that was without the pokes.
Mm-hmm.
And then things like, I remember roller skating, and so I was before my sister was born, so maybe I was 6 or 7, and falling down and getting winded, when you sit down hard, you can't catch your breath, and getting terrified, and then getting home and walking in to try to get some comfort. And what she did was yelled at me for being, she would say, Sarah Heartburn, which was a tweak of Sarah Bernhardt, that I was overreacting and you make such a big deal out of everything. And so the next time I fell, I was even more terrified because I knew there was no place to go.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that pushed me to learn to do things really fast and really early, because I had to. And it's funny, my father used to remind me that as a child, if I couldn't do it right away, I wasn't interested.
Yeah.
Because the learning process would be so scary.
Yeah.
So I spent for sure, the first 23 years of my life running as fast as I could. And that's when I first started therapy and started unraveling some of this. But the slowing, it didn't slow me down. I really didn't start slowing down until my 40s, and that's a piece that I've discovered in all these years of working as a therapist, that whatever whatever psychological, emotional organization you develop early on to survive will carry you, well, I'll say this particularly for women, until your 4th decade. And then usually things happen inside or outside that break it all apart. And you have to reassemble the pieces in a new organization. And so I had been suicidal when I started therapy at 23. And in my 40s, I revisited that. I just felt like I couldn't deal, that life was just too challenging. I was sick of going through the same crap over and over again. And I was really ready to leave the planet. And instead, I decided to make, that was important both times, that my willingness to give up life allowed me the space to risk exploring an avenue that might not work out. And so this time I worked with a creative arts therapist, and we gave up all the stories, and we would just do either sounding, movement, making music, drawing, painting. And there was a timelessness. And the reason I sought her was I met one of her clients who talked about the fact that she had done some stuff in the office, and then she had scribbled all over a bunch of paper, and then she ripped up all the paper, and she didn't have to clean it up before she left. That got me. I knew that was a woman I needed to work with. And it really was amazing. And it opened my heart to myself.
Ooh, that sounds really touching. Wow.
Yeah. I could separate from the hatchet lady, who was this unbelievably vitriolic, nasty critic who, if I did it, no matter what I did, she made shit out of it.
Yeah.
And I began to see in this work of opening my heart and connecting with the wounded little one inside of me, I got to see that this vitriolic critic was really trying to protect me from outside criticism. The fact that she lacerated me with her criticism didn't count somehow, but that was the point, that was a part of me that I needed to embrace, because she had developed to protect me, even though the protection now is devastating and not very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I was left with, as I was now reflecting in this small break, is what you mentioned is that you almost, I would use the Gestalt term, interjected that hatchet voice. So almost as if it was easier for you to scold yourself and not to get that from the outside.
Exactly. That's what it did, was that it stopped me from doing things that would bring the external criticism. But the
Yeah.
way that it would stop me is by beating me up.
Yes. Yes, because
No,
probably you didn't know for anything better, or you didn't have a model that was showing you something.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
And
that's where go ahead. I was
uh
just
finish, I'm listening.
No, I was going to say that's where Carolyn, the creative arts therapist, became the role model for what an embracing, compassionate, loving presence inside myself might be. Yeah.
And also in what you mentioned in the work with her, and I'm also thinking you were relearning to learn almost, but with a compassionate presence. Is that something of your experience?
I think so. Also, I mean, it was learning that whatever I did was okay, that I could fumble and bumble, and there was room for it, and it wasn't castigated, and I wasn't shamed or humiliated. And so I could try new things without being terrified.
Mm. And then another thing, because often I ask people what success is for them, and I guess you're a perfect person to ask this, because you had something which society would maybe call an outward success, and yet you I mean, you chose to kind of give it up at one moment, and I felt that this is so brave, to do that, and yet I don't know what it looked like on the inside.
Well, everybody always reacts to it as if it were courageous or brave, but it really wasn't that. It was that I got this voice. And first of all, I had for several months a horrible backache. And so when I worked, I would lie down on my couch and talk to a client sitting. And I'd get up earlier and earlier to soak and do all kinds of things and I didn't then understand that my body was talking to me. I just thought my body was misbehaving. And at some point, that hadn't gotten through. So a voice in my head said, if I don't get somewhere green, I'm going to die. And, I lived in the middle of the Upper East Side of Manhattan in a high-rise building, and green was the furthest thing. And so I actually looked in the Village Voice newspaper, found a rental out on the far end of Long Island, off-season, wintertime, and would collapse my schedule to 3 days and spend 4 days with the man I was married to then, driving out there and riding my bicycle and hiking and drifting and dreaming and not doing anything of redeeming social value. And I felt this calling that this place was not enough. And it kept on, it was never something I thought about or decided. It was this relentless push from inside that I needed to leave New York. I needed to leave the life that I had built, the success I had achieved, all of the people I didn't have that many people in my life, but that everybody had this image of me that supported this image of me as a successful feminist therapist in the early 1970s. And I just had to go, and I had no idea. I knew I had to go cross country. I knew from a trip that the man I was married to and I took to the Southwest, where his researches indicated was the best place to relocate. I couldn't breathe. I knew I needed to get to the other ocean. And so every step of the way was not a thought out decision. It was like a push. And I think that was the first time that the grandmothers were really running the show.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the name for that. And I bought a van and outfitted it as a bed sitting room and, with detritus from my former life. And I left without a clue what was ahead. But I just was being driven from this incredible push inside.
And it's interesting because I also feel that that's where the bravery lies, because I guess many of us hear that voice, and how many are actually kind of going after it. And it's very interesting for me. I had very similar moments sitting pipetting in the lab and thinking, if I do like one more day of this, I am going to die, exactly like that. And then and then I feel like for me the change happened when I came to London, where I had it was a push as well. But I do feel like there was this, yeah, almost and also, as you say, it also didn't feel like as a choice, because at the time in 3 years ago, I felt like I had so little energy that that's the only thing I could do, almost. So it doesn't feel like
wherever I speak, you had this similar experience.
Yes.
I mean, you're saying it's courageous to listen, but I really, and it sounds like you too, didn't feel like I had a choice.
No.
It was this.
Yeah, no, exactly. And what I was also curious about, and maybe well, actually what came to my mind is you went from what I imagine to be a big apartment or a biggish apartment to a small van. What were the valuable things you brought with yourself? What was of value to you?
I brought an alcohol casserole burner, which is what I cooked on. I brought supplies so that I could still bake my own bread, which when I went to campgrounds, I'd make a deal with the campground, the forestry people or whoever was running, that if I could use their oven, my recipes were all for 2 loaves, that I'd give them a loaf of bread so I could continue to bake my own bread. I needed floor space padded so that I could do yoga. I didn't at the beginning invest in a porta potty. What I had was the thing that was like a TV tray, but it had a toilet seat on it that you put a plastic bag in. And then I left my leavings at various places along the way. I took some of the crocheted clothing that I had made for myself that were in boxes under the bed. I really didn't take many things. I took what would make the van livable as a home. I always thought about it like a turtle shell, that I had everything that mattered to me, and there wasn't much. The van that was a strip tradesman van, so it didn't have a radio. So I had a radio, a Gundig, that I had on the dashboard. I'm trying to think what else. Mostly it was just clothes that I needed to wear that I hung on the steel supports of the roof and then tucked in. I don't think I took very much. Maybe a journal to write in. But it felt like nothing from my last life was worth taking. Because I had no idea where I was going or what I was going to do.
That's also an interesting thing, as you're saying that, because it also shows, it sounds also like a sort of a death, but just a different rebirth, a rebirth into this life.
Oh, absolutely. I had to, the sequencing was originally the men I was married to and I were going to do this together. And then we looked at, the places he thought he had researched that would be, and I knew I couldn't be there. And then over the few months of processing this, I realized I needed not to go with him. I needed to leave that relationship behind. And it was, I think, when I read the story of Inanna, yes, that I was just like dropping everything, because everything was completely infused with this other way of living. And to be able to go in this unknown, wide open direction, I needed to divest myself of everything that had signaled okayness before. And at the time, I just remembered I had been reading the Carlos Castaneda books. Do you remember that? And so my commitment was erasing personal history. So,
wow.
So as I met people along the way, and for the first 3 months, I didn't really talk with anybody. I never told them who I had been or what I had come from. I just showed up in the moment. So there was no baggage.
And I'm wondering, there was a physical erasure of personal history, and yet there was probably the embodied personal history. And I imagine that some of that embodied baggage was somehow still present. Or was it? I don't know if I make sense what I'm asking.
I'm not sure I understand what you're.
So what I experience is that, because I have moved places, and somehow sometimes it feels like that move and loss of those reminders, as you say, will bring something new and fresh. And yet I would be still staying with a sort of baggage, but not a baggage that's physical, that's outside of me, but something that's inside, and something that I needed to drop emotionally, or like through movement or through therapy work, rather than through an actual physical act. I don't know if it's clearer now or not, but
it is clearer now. I'm just trying to think. My life was reduced to driving, preparing food, eating food, cleaning up from food, cleaning up from cleaning up, driving, and walking, that I would go places and then walk. So there wasn't, I'm still now, so this is like, that was when I was 31, I'm now 81. So 50 years later, I'm now doing some work with a really intuitive Pilates teacher, not the power Pilates, but the alignment and integrated, and discovering that in my body, there's still, like, she starts to teach me something and I immediately go to doing whatever it is from my mind, rather than being in my body and letting it flow through me. So in that regard, 50 years later, I still have that in my body. And only now, I've addressed it on many layers, but this is like the bedrock.
Yeah.
So, but because everything changed so much, and I didn't talk to people for 3 months. I only sent tapes back to the man I was married to, my best friend, and my sister. They would share. So nobody knew me. So I had nothing to support how I had been. But deep in my body, this stuff has still been there. Is that answering your question?
Yes, definitely. But I'm amazed. I somehow didn't perceive how that you're 81, because like your soul, or at least the way you come through sounds so alive and so magical. And it's really, as I said, I think it's really a privilege to witness you.
Oh, thank you. And actually, I just passed my 82nd birthday in November. So according to my reckoning, since our birthdays are at the end of the year, right?
Yeah.
I am now living in my 83rd year.
Wow. And actually, which November is your birthday on?
The 21st, the last degree of Scorpio.
Yeah, because mine is a 16. That's why I'm so curious.
Oh, right.
And then so then we are kind of in at the move, and so you have this baggage kind of away. What is it that emerged then as you slowly started to contact yourself?
I think I began to feel how little I knew myself. I'm just visualizing me in my van. I mean, at the beginning, I had to make busy work because there was no structure. And then, so, I would be busy mapping my route, like I said, making my food, cleaning up, and then slowly some of that would fall away. And I just realized how little I knew who I really was. And I don't know how to speak about it. I was just in the moment in a way I had never been, and it was okay. I mean, sometimes it was a little unnerving, but I would just sit with myself and talk to myself, that I'll be okay, that it's all right, but it was really free floating because all of the anchors were gone.
And I'm also imagining from the beginning of your story is how little and how difficult was for you to maybe even get in touch with needs or naming your own needs.
Oh, really? You got that?
Well,
yeah. No, that was the whole thing. I mean, it's still an issue in my life. Needing anything from the outside was always dangerous because there was criticism, there was humiliation, there was having it thrown back in my face, all of those things that were how my mother dealt with my needs. And so that was a lot of sitting with myself and being with what I needed and not being able necessarily to get the needs met. So a lot of the early learning was how to let myself feel the need without there being anything to do about it. To feel the helplessness and just be with it. And then the strategy has always been, if you can't do it yourself, don't bother. And this is not in an 83-year-old body, although blessedly, it's still temporarily quite able. I have no health issues. My mind still functions, but not either doing it yourself or doing without is not a workable strategy in an aging body. So I now have gotten a wonderful young woman who helps me with the heavy lifting in my garden because I grow a lot of my own food and irrigation and blah, blah, blah. And then I have a really sweet guy who's the handyman who helps me with some of the stuff that I finally allow myself to ask for help with. But it really started in those early days when I just could be with the need, let myself be aware of it and the ache of it and the grief that there was nobody there. and that I could survive that.
And then when was there you said the transition happened now, but was there a moment where you started to, or with your art therapist, where it started to come up where you could feel able to ask from her?
Trying to think. I think more what happened with her was she took me on early on a guided imagery, and in the process of going back over this imaginary bridge to the early days of my life, I encountered this little creature that was like I have pictures that I drew then, that was this little teeny bright sort of pink creature that was my littlest alive, undamaged self. And when I met that self, yes, exactly, it was like, how could I not love her? How could I not protect her? How could I let anybody do anything to harm her? And that really was the beginning of the journey for me. That was the launch pad, was that I met the little one inside of me and I fell in love with her. And so a lot of what still remained of my own raised eyebrow at myself, it all went away. And I didn't, trying to think, I don't know that I asked her for help, but she provided the space for me to be there for myself.
So as you said that, it sounds like that's the moment when you became a mother.
Absolutely. I became the mommy to myself. And I had to learn, how to be there for her. But some of it was just instinctual, because she needed me and I was there for her. And nobody got to intervene. And that was a big thing. Nobody else could address her directly. That I could get support for the mommy me, but only the mommy me could be there for her. That it was too dangerous to allow anybody. And also, nobody outside could cross the time barrier. That was like a whole different layer. But she was not too attached to anything outside of us.
And so I'm wondering about your psychotherapy practice before and after. And how did this impact on how you are being with people?
Well, this is a really good story, because when I started out, in the last 5 years, I connected with my first private patient. I used to call them patients, now I call them clients. And what's remarkable is that before I knew how to be there for myself, I understood what a person needs to grow. So I provided that for all the people I worked with. There's not that much of a difference in the core work that I do, but I could give it away. But I was never feeling like I deserved that same totally compassionate permission to be exactly wherever I was and to not judge it and to be able to love myself through anything. So I was, for those early years, the first 7 years that I worked before I left that life, I was creating the space and teaching myself what it, not necessarily teaching, I knew what it needed, but I was teaching me to see how it worked so that I could at some point turn it to me. And the work with Carolyn actually was the first time I was with, even though I had really wonderful therapists before, it was the first time I was with someone who could be that kind of Robyn to me. Does that answer?
Yes, it sounds like Carolyn was a jewel, like a true.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, she wasn't that in her own life, but she was great for me.
That's
Yeah.
that's something that I find also very interesting. I know this story of I don't know if it's true, but sometimes it goes around Facebook where a girl was saved from one of the concentration camps and she didn't want to eat and no one knew how to approach her. But then the man from the dorms, he made her a doll. And slowly, as she was starting to kind of feed the doll and care about the doll, she started caring about herself and she started eating herself. And I'm wondering, maybe that's my lack of knowledge or understanding of human beings, but I'm just always so curious, like how is it like that there is this, like, I don't know if it's a flaw or like bug in the system where it's so easy to take care of something that we externalize than to take care of ourselves. Almost as if it's so difficult to have, I don't know, an image of ourselves outside of ourselves. I don't know, it's quite um
Well, what I would go ahead.
no, I don't have anything to say. I guess I'm stayed with confusion.
I think the thing is that if you've been inadequately nurtured or mothered, you don't feel deserving of
Mm.
that. Because I think that, and I can't cite anything that would establish this as truth, but I really believe that our beings come into a body on the planet knowing that we deserve to be beheld with love. When we aren't, because of whatever deficiency there is in the parenting, the birthing person, then what happens, even I think before we have language or conceptual reality, is that we feel it's something deficient in us.
Us. Yeah.
And so we try to be whatever it is we think will get something from this person. And I always tell this story as a teaching story. This little girl comes home from school and she's been attacked by bullies, and they say if she doesn't bring $1 tomorrow, they're going to beat her up. So she comes home and she talks to her mother and she tells her mother she needs $1. Her mother goes to the cookie jar and takes a quarter out and gives her the quarter. And the little girl gets frantic. She said, no, you don't understand. I need $1. And she tells the whole story again because she thinks the mother didn't get that how important it was that and the mother still holds the quarter. And this goes round and round and round. And the little girl is more and more and more frantic. Well, the reason the mother kept giving her a quarter was that was all there was in the cookie jar. The mother understood she needed more, but the mother was so unable to acknowledge that she didn't have what was needed and then tell the little girl to go to her aunt or her grandmother or the next door neighbor, because that would be acknowledging that she didn't have enough. So this is how a lot of us have learned about needs. And then when I first put down some roots in Santa Barbara after being on the road for 2 years, I worked at a free clinic, and one of the women was a woman who was one of the collective directors. She was also a full-time student, and she had a little girl who, when I first met her, Jenny was 4. And Jenny would say, Mommy, I need you to read me a story. And what Leslie would do would say, I don't have the time, but let me call Mary or Robyn or Sandy, and maybe they can read you a story. And then in the next year, she learned how to dial the phone. And so when she wanted something that Leslie didn't have the energy or time for, she would tell her who to call. And I think that's a real, the bad side and the good side, but what happens is if you really, and so many of us spend our whole lives thinking there's something about us, and if we could only be the right and do right and be enough, then we would get whatever it is we're looking for from the outside. And the truth is that if we really were faced with it, the fact that those who are supposed to provide it didn't have it, we would lose hope.
Yeah.
Because presumably your family are going to love you no matter what. So.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, was the hatchet lady and having the equivalent of the hatchet lady with what your mom was able or unable to give you, was that something that you were aware, acutely aware of during all the time, or it's something that came out from your therapy over time?
No, it's something that came out as I did the work with mothering this little one inside, and that I really understood then that I had been building a repertoire of a good mommy by what I was doing for the people I worked, what I was helping the people I worked with create for themselves. And by having Carolyn sort of be an external Robyn as therapist to me, I was able to begin to feel like I deserved it too. And to give it to myself.
As you're saying that, I just feel like a lot of warmth that you actually managed to give that to yourself eventually.
Oh, I am the queen of taking good care of oneself.
Yes. Yes, and that is something I admire about your book, but that's also something, learning how to communicate what people would now call boundaries, but maybe I would call communicate one's own needs and also honor one's own needs. And that's something that I feel, what I really loved about our conversation and about some parts of the book where you say that even with your closest friends, the arrangements are susceptible to change depending on how both of you feel
on the day.
on the
Absolutely.
day. And I just love that. It feels, I feel, I guess it feels so contrary to the culture we live in now, where everything is somehow planned out, but then we arrive to that moment trying to fit into the image we have created for the moment rather than seeing what emerges from it.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and so I'm wondering, as you made the decision to move and to change, what is it that you learned about how we function as a culture, and do you imagine the way you function now can somehow be a more, let's say, societally normalized, or not normalized, I don't know the words, but let's say present way of living?
Well, I think about myself sometimes as a guerrilla theater person, the GUER guerrilla, that everybody in my life has taken permission. When I say, how do I know what I'm going to feel like next Thursday? Let's put it in and see how we both feel on Thursday. And if it's still a go, let's do it. So people who have really busy, packed schedules are really edgy about that, but they breathe a sigh of relief, that. And I think about all the people who've been in ACA or any of the 12-step programs, and there's always this thing about honoring your commitments, right? So I say my commitment is to honoring myself, and if honoring myself means I can't be there, then you won't have a facsimile of me. If I show up, I'm really there. And most people are relieved to have that option, even though it may be disorienting. I would like the world to move in that direction. And I think that some of the upside of this crazy COVID business is that it's like a cosmic permission slip to say no.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really hard to break the mold if you've been doing it for a long time. But I think that if you get some permission and some modeling to do it, that it's such a relief to the being in you that the problem is that you can't advocate it if you don't feel 100%, because if you don't feel 100%, you have Velcro, and then everybody will throw their criticisms of it at you. But if you can really be okay with how you are, then nobody gives you crap for it. They may not feel comfortable with it, but I have a small circle of really close women friends, and they tell me when they have an event, and they know that I won't come, but they want me to know that if I woke up that morning and wanted to, that I was invited. But they don't feel, insulted or not honored by my not showing up. They know that mostly I spend my time alone, and that I don't do bunches of people. I'll do one-on-one, or if it's a couple, two-on-one, but that's about. And so I'm weird, but people accommodate me. And if they aren't in my life. I have a small circle of people who respect and honor this about my life and use it for themselves.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because you say you're weird, and I always, as you were just saying this, I was calling that about myself spontaneity. But and I guess I did feel like there is something odd about that because it is important for me, if I am with you, to give you my presence.
Absolutely.
And if I cannot, it doesn't feel like. And also it's important for me to give myself my own presence.
Yes.
So I find it really interesting how to find a way to normalize this, to not make it weird, actually, because it seems that I feel like it stems from an emotional education which so little of us receives. And I think it's regardless of the kind of family or early nurturing we have. So I don't know if, so I'm curious on your thoughts on also, where do we fail even as education, in education, to do this? Because I'm thinking, even as psychotherapists or psychologists, why is this not also something that we receive as learning? Because it always sounds like, oh, this is how many clients, this is I don't know, you have to be there for them every time, at this moment, at this time. And I'm like, actually, that scares me to death.
It should I talk about it from both sides. When we're trained to do it 50 minutes, and with billable hours, you want to have, maybe you have 10 minutes in between and then the next person. And it drove me crazy. I always ran over. And, the theory in the training is that if people get to the best part in the last 5 minutes, they're resisting, right? Well, what they're resisting is your timetable, but the theory in the training would be that if you gave people unlimited time, they'd never get to it. It's a lie, that I started 30, maybe 35 years ago, maybe more now, just doing open-ended sessions. That is, that a person came and they worked until they were done for that time. And that once I was working with a young woman, and her father wrote me a scathing letter about how could I let her go on and on. And I said, I let her go on until she's finished, so that she listens inside herself to when she's had enough. And the truth is that, so then the professionals community says, well, how can you schedule? And, everybody turns out after the initial, check to see if we fit, everybody has a rhythm I can predict within 10 or 15 minutes. So I schedule that way, and I only work 2 days every other week. And that allows me, and I take 1 week that I don't answer the phone and I don't do email at all, so that people, when they start with me, know that, and they know if they have a crisis that week, they're on their own. And that taking that week of nothing and only working 2 days a week on the 2 weeks a month that I work, I'm able to show up. If I weren't able to show up, I would cancel. I wouldn't. And that's what I say to people about that they can call me anytime. I'm a night owl. But if I pick up the phone, they can trust that I'm there, that I do not pick up the phone unless I can be available. And if I don't pick up the phone and I hear the message, as soon as I am available, I'll return the call. Everybody does fine with this because they get that if I'm there, all of me is with them. Yeah. And that if I can't be all of me with them, I'm not there.
Yeah.
It's very I'll take back weird. I used weird as the outside read of it. It really is listening to our inner knowing. And if that's what my job is, as I construe it, that's what I feel like doing therapy is helping people connect or reconnect with that deep inner self that knows exactly what they need and what they want and what they feel. Why would I have them do it on my timing?
Yeah.
That I see some people totally ad lib, some people once a month, some people every other week. Sometimes, I have in the 3 weeks that I'm accessible, they can call anytime and get 10 minutes, to just touch in. But I try to make the medium and the message the same. This is not what we're trained for. And a lot of what we're trained for is garbage. It really is. It's about billable hours. It's about how Freud did his practice. It's not about listening deep. And if you're going to be doing the work of helping people listen deep, you've got to be doing that yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, my view is that I cannot take anyone on places I haven't taken myself. And actually, as you were saying that, there was another thing which came to my mind. You said listening to oneself and to one's own rhythm. And I was also thinking how much of the emotion has a peak, and then and people think when the wave comes, they think it's going to last forever. But if one allows them the space for it to pass in our presence, suddenly I realized, I mean, I'm talking this because I realized that with my therapist. Suddenly I don't really need my therapist 8 hours a day. Wow. Because it's really, and so that's really incredible for me, because I started to realize that, yeah, they have a peak, they happen and they pass. And that's the amount of time I need to be with myself or with another. So, yeah.
Exactly. That's a thing, you were saying earlier on about our education is so deficient, emotional education. The truth is, some people say, I can't let myself cry because if I start crying, I'm going to cry forever.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
The truth is, if you don't stifle it and shove it down, that you're exactly right. Emotions have a trajectory. They build like a sine curve and then they decay. Doesn't mean they go away forever. It's just till the next time you go through that. But that it's how it is. That's how emotions are. They come, they peak, they diminish. And you have to make the space for that. And if you stifle it, it's like putting a lid on it. And I always see like a big barrel full of all of these stifled emotions that ferment and make toxic gases and blow the lid off. And so if you've packed all of this away, when it erupts, it can go on for a long time, which is not what happens when you let yourself go through it safely each time.
And I would like to read what I read to you before we started the conversation, because I want to talk about the messages that the emotions are carrying up for us. And so I will read just a small passage from your book. It says, "It's true that the harsh treatment did ultimately lead to the dissipation of my fears. Yet the way I treated myself robbed me of the opportunity at the time to discover what the fear was about inside of me." And I would love to hear, I think this is a little bit against the just do it culture, the go out of your comfort zone, all these kind of things. And I guess what I would like to hear, because I still think you're very successful. I still think you have brought so much to us from being with yourself. But then I think you are doing it from a different place now.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I would like to hear more about what were the messages that you were starting to receive as you were starting to allow your emotions to speak.
I'm not sure I get the question. I'm sorry.
So no. So as you were slowly staying with those emotions and not rejecting them as like, oh, I shouldn't be fearful, I shouldn't be this. As you were starting to listen to them, what do you think, or how did you maybe hear what the messages they had are? Not only that they would appear and pass, but if you would have listened to this fear, what do you think the message of that fear for you would be?
I think, let me try. I'm not sure I'm still.
Yeah.
I think what happens is when the fear comes up, I understand that some part of me is not okay with what's going on and is frightened.
Yeah, that's one of the messages that I was kind of thinking about, that there is a part of you that feels something that is, yeah.
And what I've learned is I don't have to become only that part. What I have to do is bring the overarching or the mommy part in and listen to who's afraid. And it's amazing. Sometimes all you have to do is listen and let that frightened part know that you know she's afraid and that you're with her. I mean, that's the thing. All you have to do, there's nothing to do to fix. It's just to be with, so that those parts that have been shut down, abandoned, judged, closed off, get to feel like they're heard. And so then what I have done over the years is when that comes up, I say, okay, and I'll hold, I have always had like a little totem, like it's been a little teddy bear that stands in for her, and I hold her and I say, we don't have to do this. We don't have to go anywhere. I'm here. You can be afraid. You're not alone. And then sometimes after a while, I can say, is there any way anything we can do to make this less scary? And if there isn't, then there isn't. But very often the fact that you're just willing to open a space for the frightened part to be frightened, that you're not shutting her down or kicking her out or judging her, allows her to relax some. And then you can figure out if there's actually a way to go ahead, or whether this is something that absolutely is not to be done.
Yeah, so it's also an interesting thing. Bonnie Badenoch, a psychotherapist that I really like, she talks about inner communities as well. And she talks about nurturing the heart with the brain in mind. So just kind of having that overarching holding. And I guess what I'm also wondering is, what happened to me as you were speaking is I'm thinking of some of the people that I work with. And when I would even ask them, what would you say to that aching part of you? The sadness is that they don't even have the words. What you just described is really missing. the words of "I'm here, I hear you, and I can stay with you as long as you need to." And those things are just, and they weren't there for me also sometimes. I mean, before I started the work with my therapist. So that's another part of things that I think we might miss as a culture.
Absolutely.
Mm.
It's funny, the thing you said before, I had, the organic herbal teas often have a tag with something written on it. And one day the tag said, "Don't just sit there, do something." And I was horrified. And I said, "No, it's don't just do something, sit there."
Sit there.
Just, that this culture we don't get taught to be with our feelings. The thing is, go away from it as quickly as you can. And, when I start people with listening to the little ones, they're always overwhelmed to think about it because I don't have time. It's going to take so much. It doesn't take much. All it takes is being there and listening.
Yeah, I mean, that's my experience, is that in the last 2 years, I think I have done more or less the same work outwardly, and yet I've done it from a completely different inner space. And it looks like, oh, this is taking so much from me, but then suddenly it's giving me so much that I can give more.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And
a lot of
so yes, I'm listening.
No, it takes a lot of energy to keep that stuff down.
Yeah.
And if you let it come out, then all the energy you use to suppress it is available to you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So
yeah.
You're experiencing exactly what I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm also curious, one of the questions I asked in the podcast is around gender, and you said you were a feminist psychologist, and also I do see you as a true spirit grandmother, and I'm wondering what is now your understanding of the feminine, and how do you work, if you work with men, with the feminine in them and the nurturing part in them?
Well, I used to work with men, and occasionally recently I worked with an 88-year-old man who was dealing with a lot of stuff. And what I found was the working with men was too hard, that I worked with men who were artists, writers, actors, or dying. Because all of those men were cracked open. And so they could connect with, this is what feminism really lets you understand. As much as it oppresses women, it really oppresses men. Then from the beginning, there's a role. You're not allowed to feel, you're not allowed to be soft, you're not allowed to be gentle, you're not allowed so many things that make us human. So I think if you're a therapist who works with men, that's your job, is to reframe masculinity so that it includes that vulnerable is not weak. Vulnerable is really a source of strength, and that feelings really matter. And the society, the culture is so broken around the roles for men. I'm just reading actually a Rebecca Solnit. Have you ever read anything of hers? This is called the Mother of All Questions. It's a collection of her essays. And she's talking about this, that how the rape culture gets defined, that gets trained. So I think that it's much harder to work with men. The fact that they come at all is hopeful, but very often they have a very defined set of objectives, and what I do doesn't fit. I think I lost the question somewhere.
No, actually, you were very on question. I think what I was left with was with a lot of sadness. Because again, I think I just recently there was this thing that flooded the internet of a suicide of a man whose image I saw, and I was like, how much we can't see through a facade that someone is putting on, and also how much there are no support groups, at least for women. Like, at least now there are circles, and I really feel supported, and I really feel I can share, and how much sadness there is for me that there is not much of that for men. It's starting. I know I have friends who I know they're on that journey, which is really hopeful. But yes, it's a very slow process, I guess.
Very slow. It's funny. I think about it now. It's got to be 30 years ago, because I define the time by where I was living, what house. I did a men's group for 4 sessions over 2 months with the partners of some of my women friends or women clients. And what I did was nonverbal. I had them do massage with each other. I had them do some just sitting knees to knees and eye contact, and I did a lot of things to open the space. And they were, of course, already a select group of guys, because they were with women who were really strong and open. And they blew my mind. And then after the 8 weeks, they decided they could do it on their own. And within 2 weeks, it was over.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't. What I offered was a women's group for men. But
Yeah.
they had enough.
Yeah.
That was very sad to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I sometimes wonder whether that's because there is something about me that doesn't understand something about their nature, or it's really the societal context where they actually didn't even get the chance to discover their nature.
I think it's really that. Anne Lamott has another thing I love. She calls women the emotional Sherpas for men. That who gets recognized is Hillary, and they summited Everest, but there's been the Sherpas who are in flip-flops, who've been up and down a million times, but they're not recognized, but they're carrying the load.
Load. Yeah, exactly.
And it's a thing that I remember from earlier years in the feminist movement, is that it was very hard for women to stop taking care emotionally of their men. So they collaborated with the men not owning their feelings and developing skillfulness to be with their feelings.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's exactly where I guess, well, it's very familiar to me. And I think it took me really, I think I always had the rage, almost had the kind of the I don't know the English word, I have it in Serbian, but the resistance, let's call it resistance, I don't remember. But what I think I didn't have, because I guess I was in a culture, or we are all in a culture that's very supportive of doing that, but I know this is wrong, I don't want to do it, this is wrong and I don't want to do it, and yet somehow people would use the sentences as like, you know how men are, or like, I mean, they have more needs like this, or, and I'm like, no. And I guess for me, what I was lacking, I guess, was another compassionate, well, it was female voice in this case, I guess it could have been a male voice, but I've been so hurt that I don't think I would listen. But yeah, I guess it was really sad for me to see that it took me 30 years to acknowledge that it's okay what I think, and it's okay to not want to take that load.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, one of the things that I think that women collaborate in this process is to I can tell you a story, but I'll get to the story in a minute, to prop up the illusion that there's somebody bigger and stronger than you who can take care of you. So that's why women collaborate. So here's the story. I used to sit in a women's circle 4 times a year with women who up north in California sat in a circle more regularly. And there was women's circles and their partners were in the men's circle. And then they, at some point, decided to do a weekend with both circles together. And so the circles sort of caucused with each other around questions and then came together. So the question that both groups had is, what is the biggest secret you're keeping from the women in your life, or the women in your life, or the men in your life? So the women in their circle started, and somebody said something, and somebody said something else. And the third woman said, the secret I keep from men is that I'm much stronger than they are. I'm much wholer than they are. The first 2 women said, absolutely, that's the secret. They all agreed that that was the biggest secret they kept from men. And then when they met together and they told the men knew it.
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing. But I think that's part of the collaboration, is that you want not to be where the buck stops.
I mean, that's an interesting thing. I had an embodied experience in my psychotherapy group where I felt like, oh, this is a moment where I need to protect myself. And yet it was a moment where I wanted protection. And I was waiting for it. And somehow I was so angry. There's no one coming here. What is happening here? And also I read in a book that actually that's an interesting thing, that it's a skill that men are taught from when in their growing up, whereas for us, it's just a skill that we need to learn, and that's it. And if we put it as easy as that, then I realized I wouldn't have to judge myself so much for not having it. I would be like, it's just a skill, and I just need to go and learn as I'm learning painting now.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And so along those lines, I'm curious, what do you think is power then? And how would you redefine power in the context of not only looking at the shadow side of power, but just how can we look at power in its light?
Well, I think in its light, it's empowerment rather than power. And I'm sorry, I have a cat.
Yeah, that's why I really saw immediately. We can invite her in the podcast.
And he's a pest.
It's okay.
He wants to be petted, or he wants something, but he'll stop in a bit. I'm always in the quandary, because it's his only way to communicate, that he either wants to be petted, brushed, or fed, but it's obnoxious. And so when I do what he's asking, I'm really reinforcing that he's going to keep on anyway.
Yeah.
But sometimes what he does, he gives it up, and then he sits behind the computer where I can. Now I lost my track. Power. I think that what real power is the capacity to be fully in yourself and fully advocating for yourself. And that when we are empowered in that way, it's not like a piece of pie where if I have the power, you don't. It's that because I've empowered myself, everybody around me gives themselves the same permission. That it's not, that there's only so much, and if one person has it, the other person doesn't. And then I have this quote in the other book that I wrote that's very apropos at the moment, that arrogance is directly proportional to the degree of insecurity.
Yeah.
Because if you don't feel empowered, the only option you have to feel big and strong is power by putting that. So when you see somebody behaving arrogantly, it's a tip off. Don't be bamboozled by the arrogance, really see the insecurity.
Yeah.
And the fear underneath it. Yeah.
And now, as you just walked away, I saw one of the drawings of the lady that's kind of lying down in the back of you, and I actually was curious to ask you, how did those drawings come up? Because they look like very much as just lines, and yet they have so much form. And how did they emerge for you as you were making them?
Well, what happened in 1990, 91 was I kept getting these messages that ultimately became the cards in the deck. And I had some line drawing, stick figure things. And one night I was drawn to my desk, and in a matter of a couple of hours, I had 8 figures. And that was it. I mean, they were like the words in the card. They came through me. They really were from the grandmothers, I believe.
I think I would slowly wrap up, because I think we covered quite a lot. But I also love your book on gentleness, and I just would love to hear some of your thoughts on going gentle. And what does gentle mean for you?
It's the opposite of what we learn. That it's about taking time and making space to be however you are, whenever you are, and to not rush yourself, and to not demand that you do something that doesn't feel right. Just being kind. Going slow. Listening in, really making that your priority, is that you listen to what your inner self wants, no matter what anybody else suggests is the right way. That there's so much that we get bamboozled into because we want to be okay or right. And most of the time, it's really harsh on our gentle little self. So I don't know if that does it, but
yes, it does.
Okay.
And I think what I didn't ask you is, what attracted you to psychology and then working with people in psychotherapy?
I have to think. I went to Bennington. Do you know Bennington? It was in the time that I went. Oh, now he's here, so maybe I can pet him. It was, let's see if you can see him. No.
What's his name?
His name is Handsome Boy. Handsome for short. I loved theater, and in high school I was involved in performing and building sets and doing all the things. And so Bennington was a small liberal arts women's college at that time. It's now co-ed. And it had a dance division, a drama division, an art division, and a social science division. And so I felt like I could get the training in the craft of theater at the same time that I could feed the intellectual side of myself. And so I went, and within the first year, this is a long story. I'm trying to make it shorter. Within the first year, I discovered very harshly that I had to play the game in the department to get the roles, because then I did have a role. We did do a workshop. The scene I was in with 3 other people got selected to go to a festival. The people I worked with were driving me crazy. There were 2 drama boys and another woman, and it was a scene from Sartre's No Exit. And I began to blur the line between reality and the play. And instead of having this long weekend break, I was going to be going someplace with these 3 other people that I could not tolerate. And so I decided I'm not going, because I needed the break and I needed not to be with these people. And so after we won the competition and were being sent, I went to the head of the department, said, I'm not going. And he called in my counselor, who was also in the department. And they said, if you don't go, you can't be in the theater division anymore. And I said, okay. Because it was, so that's, I mean, that was when I was 17, 18. So already this way that I lived had started, that was really not okay. And the only other thing I was taking that was of any interest was an abnormal psychology course taught by this wonderful, wonderful teacher. And I got totally into that. And then I took the whole psychology program. And then I had a really good mentor. And I had to write a thesis. And he sent me to work with this guy in New York who was in perception, which is what my thesis topic was in. And so I was working with this director of the graduate school at Yeshiva University, and I got invited to enter their graduate program if I wanted. I would never have thought to do it. I mean, this is again, the grandmothers operate, so I said, okay, I'll try it for a while. And I tried it for the first year, and I was appalled because we had some of the biggest names in the profession taught segments of this introductory course, and they were all so uniformly intolerable to me. They were so full of themselves, and they would carry on and pontificate. And I thought, this is really fucked. And so I went to my mentor and I said, maybe I need to go to a different school. Maybe we could get me into NYU. He said, and I told him why. He said, it's going to be the same there. That's how it is.
Yeah.
But what he said was, if you stay, I'll do individual seminars with you. And I really had a good connection with him. And so I stayed and I worked. And then I was working in perception, but I was going to do developmentally, looking at it across different categories. So I took the clinical courses to be able, because of course I wouldn't trust anybody else's diagnostics. So I would be able to, screen my own subjects. So then by the time I graduated, I had done all of the experimental coursework and all of the clinical coursework. And then I wrote a dissertation, which developed out of this seminar with him, and people were having such struggles with dissertations, being sent back to do more subjects and more. And they told me to stop, because I read these old journals from people, the old Germans who had done explorations with goggles that inverted the retinal image. And, it never resurrected, but in all the journals, it was clear within the first few days that the visual field stopped swinging. Because if you think about it, you got the picture that if your eyes are moving, so by changing the pattern, so they were adapting, but nobody recognized that. So I set up a whole bunch of equipment, and it turned out I didn't need any of it. People adjusted. They had a helmet they wore made the projector. Anyway, I had a 44-page dissertation. They told me to stop running subjects. I did everything my own way. And he had 2 proteges, me and another woman. I wouldn't let him into my lab. She did the girl thing. She would get him involved in every step in the way, which I think was part of a political choice on her part, that she felt that would. I never let him in until the end.
Wow.
So then I thought, now I'll go to acting school. And then I realized the reason I left the theater program was that the people were all a pain in the ass. You know, everybody was so self-absorbed and so narcissistic. And I thought, do I really want to be around people like that? And if I do theater, it means I live on the other side of the clock than everybody else. So these are my peeps. And I realized, no. So I went on thinking I would do research, but then slowly I got involved because I had been assisting the clinical department, the woman who was the head. And then I just got involved in liking the idea of doing therapy. So it was like tumbling and being sped out there. And when I sent out my announcement of the opening of my practice, my research mentor sent it back and wrote, "Et tu, Brute."
Can you say more about that?
Et tu, Brute is from what Caesar says to Brutus, who's killing him. So I was his golden-haired protege, and I was abandoning him. And she, the clinical professor, called me and said, I can't recommend anybody to you. You haven't done postgraduate training. You have no business opening a practice. So they both abandoned me. And it was too bad. I mean, I later on felt for that me, but it was, I was used to being abandoned.
Yeah.
So I started a practice on my own, and there was one more story that one of the clinical professors, who was a psychiatrist who did our seminar, sent me a client to evaluate for him, which is a fraught thing because they're asking you to give them information they don't get by themselves. But they're the big honcho. And so I did this. It was like a captain of the industry who really had this naked, vulnerable little boy inside of him. And I wrote the whole thing up and I typed it on my typewriter with some strikeovers, and I left it, brought it to Ed's office. And he called me at 6:30 the next morning in a towering rage. He said, I had his wife done by somebody who's more experienced in Westchester, and they charge $200. And how could you charge $250 for a thing with strikeovers and short skirt it was like he was crazed. I'll never send anybody to you again. I said, you sent me to do this, and you sent me the instruction that you wanted me to consult with the woman who taught me Rorschach. And I did. And she thought that I should charge for her time as well as my own. Fuming, craziness. I'll never send anybody to you. I said, that's fine. Don't even think about it. And I hung up. So all of the people who mentored me, when I chose to listen to what was so for me, they fell away.
Yeah, I mean, that also sounds that often that you're not mentored for the right reasons, that the exchange was not coming from the right place.
No, I was supposed to carry them forward, not be on mine. That's the difference again. I was empowered to be myself, and that wasn't okay with them.
But that's an interesting thing. I mean, Bell Hooks, actually, I love her book, Teaching to Transgress. And in the book, she often says that only the self-expressed, or how do you call it, I'm lacking the final stage in the Maslow hierarchy, but you know what I mean. The self-actualized, yes, that's the word. The self-actualized professors are the ones that can truly teach, because unless there is that point of self-actualizations, they will always try to, well, make their students live their own unfulfilled dreams in a way.
Totally. This is, I mean, my case is a case in point.
Yeah.
That's the difference between being empowered or not being empowered or self-actualized, was that they still needed me to be subservient, to be an acolyte, to not be my own person, to not have my own authority. Yeah.
And that's, but there's an interesting thing about you, which I'm a bit perplexed, because on one hand you had that upbringing which was really clearly trying to not help you self-actualize, and yet there was some inner voice or something that was still being quite strong in protecting yourself, in protecting your authenticity. And I'm wondering, have you ever explored what that is, or what was that support that helped you to say no, or say don't even think about it, and not even be afraid of losing someone who actually is affecting your career or your life, um, 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 I would say, like financial life and livelihood. Yeah.
I think I came in with it, that I think that was some kind of inalienable spark of life inside of me that allowed me to survive the absences of my childhood, and the fact that there was nobody to rely on but me. And so I didn't rely on people, even my mentors, and it was a good thing, because they all, sometimes I think about that, me, and I did fine, but I think that was really excruciating, that I fledged, and I was so excited about my entry into my full personhood, and what they all did was say, essentially, screw you.
Yeah.
If you don't pay homage to us and do it. I mean, the woman who wanted me to go to postgraduate school never stopped going to school. I said to her, I'll learn by doing and having supervision.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be out there on my own.
Yeah.
So the only thing I can make of it is that I came in with that kind of fierce fire inside of me that continued to support me through no matter what happened. I feel really blessed.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And also it's for me at least, it's a fire that illuminated a journey for my journey as well. So so thank you. Thank you for respecting that fire.
It was not a choice.
Choice. I
And
know, I feel the
know that
same.
from yourself. It's not a choice. It's just not a choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and the same thing about the books and the writing and everything. It's like, I am not in charge. I get pushed. And so since I did the reading and signing, the only one I did for any of the 3 books for the Gentleness book was October 2018. I have done nothing. Nothing has come through. And sometimes it's totally fine. And sometimes I miss that flow, that sort of impassioned flow, but there's no way to create it unless it comes through me.
Yeah.
And I'm going on, but this is the important piece to it. Since 84, 85, solstice, New Year, the grandmothers have given me what you saw in the book, the Gentleness book. Those are all messages that came at this time of year. I never count on it. And usually sometimes it comes as early as May, sometimes, but this year, it's like, will something come? I have no idea, but I got involved with updating my mailing list. I have a mailing list of 120. I'll put you on it too. People that I have already put you on it, actually. That's why I was checking the address. That I send whatever comes, and then I always go through my collections of quotes and pull ones that support the message. And then I usually write what I call the anti-holiday letter, which is usually about, not my accomplishments, but more about my retreats. And so I finished the labels at like 1:30 the other morning, and then this came. I'm going to read it to you, okay?
Yeah.
This is what the card is, and the woman who does my graphics, she's doing it. So climate emergency, COVID, a world seemingly ever more calamitously running off the rails, hate, brutality, toxic divisiveness proliferating daily. Hungering, we search out oases of kindness, caring, kindredness, hope. We commit to ourselves becoming sources of these same healing energies. We feed our aching souls with nature, trees, green growing beings, the ocean, the coming and going winged ones, reminders all of the endless cycles of birth, death, rebirth, of ebb and flow. Remembering, even in the desolation of winter's dark, forbidding barrenness, new growth germinates, invisible, deep below the surface. After the deepest darkness, the light inevitably begins its return. In these days of desolation, we move more slowly, our own light often dimmed by all that surrounds us. Still, we warm ourselves in loving connection with our heart family, kindred soul friends, our four-legged companions. We hold each other close, do what we can to walk kindness, caring, and compassion back into the world. So they came through.
So I think this is a perfect sentence to end on, but I would want to ask you, is there anything that I didn't ask and you feel like you want to add?
I just want to underscore something you did mention. I think that those of us who do this work as therapists, we do much better if we work from our own healing experiences rather than from book learning. That the authenticity and sharing that stories is incredibly healing in a way that the stuff we learn in books really doesn't hold a candle to.
I share that value so much. And is there anything you would like to ask me?
I'm just so curious how you got into doing these interviews.
I always wanted to do it. I always watched a lady on a Serbian television show, which somehow was creating an island of I don't know how to say, an island of knowledge and integrity, I would say, that was not present in other shows. And so I always wanted to do it as a way of connecting curiously with people, but I didn't know how to give it form. So it was there, it was always a wish, but I just didn't know how to do it. And then COVID started. I already bought everything because I knew I will do it. And then I was supposed to do it with my ex-husband, but I realized that's actually not, I mean, it didn't seem like he's going forward. And so I felt like, well, I can't wait for him. This is my wish. And if he wants to join me on, he will join me on. So I bought everything, but I still didn't have the concept. I still wasn't sure what is it that how I'm going to frame it, so to give it some sort of a holding. And then I had a wonderful friend I lived with, and the two of us started talking about recording each other in our conversations, because our conversations are like this, open-ended, around all these kind of different topics. And then I was like, the saddest part is that no one would like to hear our opinion unless we are successful. And then we decided that we want to interview each other as if we were already whatever the society would deem successful.
I love it.
So we did my interview, and then we did hers, and then she actually came up with the well, in conversation, the being and doing came because we were discussing how much we were in the doing and then how much we are lacking the being and how to create to do from the being. And so it became being and doing. And I think it really allowed me a space to really follow every curiosity I have. That's so cool. Yeah. So that's how it all went.
Wow. Now, the thing that is amazing to me is your fluency in nuanced English when Serbian is your native language. How long is it of a journey has it been to this kind of fluency? I mean, obviously mind works in either language, but the level of fluency is amazing considering that your native language is so not the same.
Yeah, I guess my sensibility for wanting to express myself as precisely as possible is really pushing me. And I think I speak 7 languages. So I think it's I was born as Serbian and Macedonian, so they're not so different, but I'm still bilingual. And I think that really helped me because I learned languages in a very embodied manner. I started learning English when I was, I think, 10, I would say. But I think what propels my language is really the wish to connect. So in that wish, I would embody whatever kind of needs to happen there to come through. So I think the willingness to learn languages is more like because I really want to connect and exchange. Wow. And I think that's where the fluency comes from. And I love beautiful words. It's like I said, I have such a love of words. I don't know, there's this wonderful Netflix series, it's called Anne with an E, and she uses this word scrumptious. I just like when I hear something like that, it just makes me, I have the same I guess embodied reaction to that as when I see a beautiful painting or so I think it's also a consequence of my love for words in general.
Wow, well, it's very impressive. It really is. Oh my gosh. And I have now heard about this Anne with an E several times, so I'm going to join Netflix to be able to watch it.
Oh, yeah. That one is, it's, well, I don't want to say more, but it's just,
it's scrumptious.
It's scrumptious. It's absolutely scrumptious. Yes.
Oh, this is such a blessing. It was worth all the struggle we had to get here. Oh my gosh.
Yes, we managed, and thank you. And
thank you so much. You are an extraordinary interviewer. You really are. It's amazing, just what you touched and what you opened. You're very, very talented at this. I think it's an art form for sure.